Hi, I'm Sydney, and I am a servant of the Almighty God. I am also the author of From Whence Cometh Intelligence and Humanity's Inflection Point. Today I want to introduce you to something that is extremely important. This is a synopsis of the Instrumentation of Life. So I'll do it in three parts, right? First I want to refute or basically deal with the current assertions that we accept and is being taught everywhere throughout these educational environments. This is what's being taught. I have to refute that first. Then I'll show you how the instrumentation of life replaces that and makes sense. It connects to everything, the past, the present, and the future. Even things that may seem like fringe, the instrumentation of life relates to it. So first, today in academia, we are taught that life started as some sort of random, something came out of the primordial soup based on random chemistry turning into biology and all of that stuff. What that really is, it's backfilling what Sir Charles Darwin discovered in 1859, that evolution is real. That's the process by which things change. It's an ongoing process throughout life. So naturalists and others came along and they started to backfill. Well, if there is evolution, then let's figure out what came before that. And this is where random has basically gone away now, because we realize throughout biology there is nothing random. Random only exists when we don't understand something. Then over time we realize, oh, so that's how that works, and we realize it's not random. So what you will hear now is two things. You will hear time, over time, and we will also hear a lot of nature did this, nature did this. So I want to refute both. Whenever you hear someone says over time, there's three things you can use to totally refute it. One is hibernation. Explain to me how over time, hibernation, which is where an animal can go to, in this sort of suspended animation, kind of sleep for like up to 5 months with no food. That could not happen over time because winter is winter. So the animal could not go to sleep for 3 days or 5 days, wake up, and then the next time its next generation decide, well, I'll go for 7 days, then I'll go for a month. No, right? If the animal was not built that way, it simply cannot hibernate. Same thing with aestivation. Frogs and, you have like fish eggs and all these things that they go into this, again, suspended animation until the conditions are good for sustain their life, and then they wake up. That could not happen over like 3 days, because think about somewhere like in Africa with the rains, maybe it's next year. So you try to say I'm ready for 3 days or 2 weeks. No, so that could not develop over time. You either had it or you didn't. Think about metamorphosis, right? That butterfly knowing which tree to lay his egg on, so it could not over time. He died and all his eggs died because he didn't get the right tree. Then the next one decided, and so over time it does not work. From the first one, they have to be wired for this, it has to work. Now the thing about nature, and you'll hear this a lot, so we can push over time and time to the side. Does not make sense. It does not meet those things, right? In no case it doesn't work, but these are ones that basically highlight it. When you talk about nature, I really think that nature, right, is like continuing that whole concept of God in control of everything. God knows everything. And so it's like, well, if you're gonna say nature but refer to something that knows everything, can manipulate the DNA of everything, because nature, symbiosis between plants and animals, nature took care of that. when you have mimicry, one animal mimics another dangerous animal, nature took care of that. So nature had to go in and modify the DNA of this one, that one, and you're like, things like an octopus. Nature went in and decided that. So nature had to know all millions of species, and nature had to be constant. That sounds like the same thing like God. What's the difference? Okay, so we can put nature to the side because nature sounds good, but when you delve into it, it makes no sense, because then we have nature running around to all these plants and animals and changing their DNA and coordinating and all of these things. We should be able to find nature somewhere. We need to corner nature and say, hey, what's your name? How did you learn this? Okay, and we will see that again, the relics of it's out there. Now, does it make sense that you have this external force, this external entity that's controlling all these millions of things simultaneously? Not really. So let me get into the instrumentation of life and show you how this works. So the instrumentation of life, of course, it starts with recognizing, and this is information again that we have now in the 21st century. This was not available in the 19th century when Sir Charles Darwin did his work, and that wonderful revelation of the periodic table to Dmitri Mendeleev that transformed our chemistry, our physics, everything basically. Because even like I said, all the instruments we use now, it's based on those materials, understanding the periodic table. In the 21st century, or prior to the 21st century, if there was some intangible force controlling the behavior of anything, we would assert that to be something spiritual. A spirit was in control of it and moving it. Well, we know better now. If we see an autonomous truck, a car, a drone, so many things around us, there can be this intangible control of the behavior of that. We do not, in no way will anybody intelligent alive today say a spirit is controlling that. We understand essentially there is a logic module that controls that, and this is why the behavior makes sense. It's doing something with a purpose. So this purposeful behavior is controlled by logic. So I'll use the term logic module. So let me get back into the instrumentation of life. From, again, the 21st century, we know with robotics that in order to give autonomy and animate anything, we must put sensors on it. We must embed sensors in it. We have embedded sensors. That's how we see, we hear, we feel. So we have sensors throughout us. Plants, everything alive has sensors. There are 3 prerequisites to building a sensor. The first, or number 1, is you must have an understanding of the stimuli. If you want to build a light sensor, you must know what light is. Taste and smell, you have to actually know the properties of the chemicals or whatever you are detecting. Feeling, pH, all these things, in order to build a sensor for it, you must understand what it is. The next prerequisite, so number 2, you must be able to find materials that respond, that react, so that you can see the variation. pH, pressure, temperature, same thing with sight. You must be able to see colors, you must see gradations in, is it bright, is it dark? You must be able to see that variation. You have to find materials that respond to that stimuli. And the third prerequisite is the sensor that you build must be wired to a response system. If something hot gets on the sensor on your hand, for instance, that sensor you have to be wired to a system that processes the stimuli, process it, and then respond to it. The sensor does not. So this is why we go to our central nervous system, and then it fires off things on the muscle to say, move that hand out of that, out of that. It's the same thing with pressure, temperature. If you want to respond, the sensor detects, but it has to be wired to a response system to respond to that stimulus. Okay? So those three prerequisites actually make us aware that you must have intelligence first. Because a sensor could never spontaneously, because of those prerequisites, a sensor could not just spontaneously occur. It's not coming out of any primordial soup. Matter of fact, I like to say that if chemistry turned into biology and it crawled out, without a sensory system, it probably would have crawled right back in, without even knowing the difference. So, what we see, you have to be really intelligent to build sensors. To build a sensory system, we're talking about, you see how that's really superior. Extraordinary intelligence to build a sensory system. And this is required for anything alive that you want to be animated and give it autonomy, you must have that. We see this sensory system implemented everywhere in life. All living things have a sensory system. We also see all living things have DNA. So, as Dr. Collins, the leader of the Human Genome Project, stated, when you look at DNA, it looks like this encrypted, 4 byte. It looks like a database. It looks like an encrypted billion pieces of data in there, and that is what comprises the DNA that exists throughout life. So we see reusability. We see the sensory system being reused. We see DNA being reused. And now we get to the third part. Prior to the 21st century again, when we saw behaviors, we thought behaviors that were controlled by something intangible was controlled by some spirit. We know better now. There's that logic module that controls behavior. And so we can see what I call the ESIS. So I'll call this your introduction to what I call the ESIS, an extraordinarily sophisticated intelligence system. Extraordinarily sophisticated intelligence system. That's the logic module of life. This logic module has, so you can say that the ESIS has the logic of life. It has been programmed with the logic of life. What's the logic of life? The things we know, like preserving life, that things that we turn into fight or flight, preserving life, perpetuation of life. So this is why that's all in this ESIS, right? The ESIS has these rules that this is what life is, this is what life's about, this is how life is going to function. The ESIS, with its intricate knowledge of this, because it was designed along with sensors and the database, DNA, knows who we are. It knows our form. So the logic of life is programmed into the ESIS. The implementation of that logic of life depends on the abilities of the organism. So in a tree, the same ESIS knows this is how I perpetuate. This is why we see trees can defend themselves, right? Now we know that if browsers are on plants, the plants create tannins, so say I'll kill you if you don't stop, basically. to drive them off with the taste and all of that stuff. The trees, the ESIS says, I'm gonna, and it needs the animals to take the seeds and disperse them. So you see this relationship. When we see symbiosis, the ESIS, the same ESIS that lives in everything, the same one, reuse. It looks at the, and I'm kind of simplifying, but it can look at the DNA, look at the, it knows what we are. It says, it knows that we are human. This is how our immune system should work. So it controls that. All these chemicals are firing and all this stuff. Again, what is amazing today is that many of our intelligent, our doctors and physicists and chemists, they are still going back to this random and over time, when in fact, we can see logic in everything. The fact that the ESIS is there controlling, putting all these logical processes in place, our academics, they haven't caught up to that, right? So, and this is why they say, okay, nature is doing that. Something external to the organism is controlling that. Think about it. Whereas the ESIS is part, just like the DNA, just like the sensors, the ESIS is embedded. Just like we embed logic in our cars, our drones, so the ESIS is the logic module of life. The same logic module with the same rules, right? This is why we see trees that give fruit, but it says, I'm giving you fruit, but I want you to take my seed and spread it. This is why we see animals at a certain age changing and turning and saying, no, I want to be the one responsible for procreation. The same rules, we see them implemented everywhere. How they are implemented, again, depends on the animal or plant. But the logic of life, which has been programmed into the ESIS, we see it being implemented everywhere. In us, these are the autonomic functions, not what we learn at school or based on our cultures and all this stuff. It's what we do not control. Hold your breath and try to suffocate yourself. Just by holding your, the ESIS takes over. It says, when the brain is done, the ESIS takes over. Even so, what we see, and also now the part that brings us all together, having the same ESIS. This is where in many cultures you hear that they talk about everything has a soul. This is the ESIS. That's the logic module. We all have the same ESIS. So it just behaves differently, implementing the rules based on your capabilities. It's as if we put the same program in a drone. If the drone had propellers, the program knew, oh, you have propellers, you can lift vertically, right? You can just take off vertically. The same program looking at the configuration of a drone that says, no, we need to taxi, we need to get you to using the sensors, right? Same thing within us. This ESIS that lives, the same ESIS lives in everything. This is where you look at these old cultures and they said, there is something that connects all of us. It's why we feel the way we do when we go out into nature. Okay, the amazing kinships you can see between animals, plants, people responding different species, interspecies relationship. Maybe you and your pet. These are the things, because we all have that same ESIS. It causes us to behave. Our instinctive behavior is different because the ESIS recognizes our differences based on our DNA, what I call that configuration. It looks at the configuration and says, yeah, you will bark. You don't have the ability to speak. You bark. You purr. So the ESIS, the same ESIS, working with the sensors and the DNA, the configuration of living things, this is what brings us all together in a sense, because we all are connected through this ESIS. things like our, that sixth sense or whatever. This is where, and us trying to get in touch with our inner self. And all of this, amazingly, doctors and our scientists today haven't recognized that there is this logic module, even though we see logic everywhere. The functioning of our bodies, the behavior of all animals. You don't see any animal with this random behavior. They are born, like bees. Like recently, that thing I think I did about plants having a negative charge when they have nectar, with flowers, so that the bees has a positive. So as soon as the bee lands, the pollen attaches to the bee. Think about that. The ESIS, it says, nope, I'm going to build this negative charge. This is what logic modules do. When we think about a car driving down the street, it's getting, from the GPS, it's monitoring the tire pressures, the engine oil levels, the temperatures. The ESIS takes input from all the sensors. It monitors all these things and makes decisions. These decisions are implemented in behavior. This is the ESIS within each and every one of us. Life's logic module, the ESIS. So it connects us, and if we look at all these old customs where people talk about us being in one with nature, like I said, you see that kinship. I think there was a documentary, what it was called, Swimming with a Dinosaur, this guy with a crocodile. This guy, there's another guy down in South Africa with all these lions. The kinship we can build into species. It's because of that ESIS. We can reach beyond ourselves because we have something in common with everything else. People who, and this is where, so we start with something purely scientific, right? The building of the sensors. But we can see as we get into the logic module, it ties us all together. Some of these old things, it can even get into the whole sense of reincarnation, the spirit, and all of these things. But it's really about that logic module, because this is what we referred to when we saw this intangible controller. We always said the spirit was controlling it. But now we know, this has been revealed to us now through the inspirations, that it's this logic module of life. It is autonomous. It is not controlled by anything outside. It is programmed just like the program in our drone or car. So if the oil gets too hot, the thing sends a signal and says, look, I need to stop. I'm not going anymore to damage myself. The ESIS is way more. It's the extraordinarily sophisticated intelligence system. So it knows. This is why if we get too cold, it says pull the blood on the inside, preserve the core. The ESIS, that's the life logic module, the logic module of life. That's the ESIS. This is what is within us. This is what controls our autonomic and takes over. When we fall asleep, if something happens, this is what controls. And like I said, when you are that intelligent, the designer of the sensory system, DNA, would never build 1,000,000 different modules. You build one with the intelligence to look at the configuration, the DNA, and then get input from the sensors and react accordingly, because the logic of life is programmed into the ESIS. It says, when I'm in a plant, I'm in a camel, the ESIS knows these are the rules. The basic design says this is what I do. Propagate life, preserve life, do all these things to keep life going. This is why we see all these behaviors. So that logic module of life, the ESIS, is what's responsible everywhere. And you see, this applies, there are no gaps. Hibernation, it is built that way. The ESIS is what directs the animal to feed and gain weight. The ESIS says, no, this is not optional. You will feed because you are going to go to sleep. The ESIS is what's responsible for aestivation. He says, you go to sleep, I will control the heart rate. I will control all these things. You don't have to worry about controlling your heart rate. The ESIS is what's responsible. Metamorphosis, it is in that ESIS, it has that when it's a butterfly or a moth, this is the plant that it will, each species says, this is the plant that you will lay your eggs on. See, that's the control module. The control module is the ESIS. So for the butterflies, it says, no, you just lay your eggs here. The ESIS works at that level and says, okay, throughout metamorphosis, when you're a caterpillar, you eat. At one point, don't worry about it, you just keep eating. The ESIS is going to transform. The ESIS is what is, it's always there. In life, that's the logic module of life, the ESIS. It is what controls and dictates the autonomous parts. When with our brain and our personality, we can do whatever we want, but we can't override the ESIS. Right? We can't override our immune system. We can't override our digestive system. The autonomic is controlled by the ESIS. We are blessed. And you see now this started again with scientific, but it gets into given all these powers. This is where the prophets came and says, here are the rules. Don't do this. Thou shalt not place any gods before me. Right? All the commandments, because you are endowed with these special things. Now, the ESIS you can control, but with the brain, you have personality. You can make decisions, but you cannot override the ESIS. And it's amazing, like I said, that our supposedly brilliant in our society are not recognizing, but it's just a matter of time to recognize this, the ESIS, because this is the logic module of life. This is what we see in every creature. We see it everywhere. Like I said, it accounts for evolution because based on sensory input, it decides I need to tweak this gene or this gene. And it starts tweaking and you have mutations. This is the logic module that sits at the bottom of everything. It works with the sensors and the DNA. It knows them, so it can tweak the DNA. It gets input constantly. This is why sometimes we have, this sixth sense. Maybe this is where, with the animals, the same ESIS, it can detect there is something bad going to happen, and then dictates the animal, head for the hills. See, this explains everything. And like I said, it even ties into cultural things where we didn't have the information, but people just felt there was something there. But it was. It's always been there. Just like the sensory system, just like DNA, we now have to recognize the ESIS, the logical life module, right? This is the module that controls life itself. It is one, it occurs everywhere. So the Creator embedded the ESIS within all living things. And this is why every living thing is filled with logic, the behavior, the autonomic systems, even the instincts. Those are all embedded because the ESIS looks at DNA and says, oh, you've got this and this. This is because the logic of life is programmed into the ESIS. So I want to, now that you've been enlightened with this, even enlightenment is recognizing the ESIS. So we have all become more enlightened with this. So I want you to take this. I will try to get a synopsis of this online. There'll be a PDF so you can take it, because this is for all of us. This is knowledge that will move us forward and get us away from this nonsense of random over time and this external nature controlling everything. We know the control comes from within. The ESIS resides within each of us, not outside like nature controlling us. It's autonomous within us. So we are not controlled, we are not robots. But this logic module controls the autonomic functioning. It responds to our senses. It, in a sense, can guide us. This is where we talk about being in tune, right? We are really trying to get in tune with the ESIS that resides within us and resides in all living things. I want to thank you for taking the time, and until next time, think about this and spread the word. And until then, may God bless us all. Thank you.